I'm Kathleen Wainwright with Compass. I'm a real estate broker, been doing this for about 17 years. And this year we are doing once a month, we are doing a chat with someone that will bring meaningful information to our investor or even just some of our regular clients. So this is Eric Stimmel with Farmers Insurance. Eric, you and I have known each other for a while.
Yes.
How long have we known each other?
2013 or so.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Right.
About 10, maybe more years.
Yep.
Very cool. Well, tell us a little bit just about yourself, about your career at Farmers.
Sure. So I must have started my insurance agency about the time you started your real estate business, because I started in 2006. So I just hit my 17-year anniversary as well.
Congratulations.
So I didn't have a background in insurance before that, but I have come to find that it is something I feel like I'm good at. I've really enjoyed learning the business and working with clients and just growing right along with a lot of my clients. I'm a self-professed insurance nerd at this point because, and especially the last 2 years or so, and we'll get into that in a minute, but there's a lot going on in the insurance world. So the sort of the better armed you are with information, the easier it will be to navigate what's going on in the insurance world, because there's a lot of changes, there's a lot of transition, there's losses, there's rate increases, and it's getting pretty crazy out there. So the more that you have somebody in your corner who's been around a little while, the better off you'll be, I think. So
100% agree. And insurance can really get you, whether you're a homeowner that you occupy the property, or if you're an investor where you're really looking at those numbers and you're thinking, does this help me or hurt me if I'm paying this much?
Right.
But then if you kind of cheap out on the insurance, you learn the hard way.
Sure. Well, if you want, we can go ahead and launch into some more detailed information along that vein.
Oh, yes.
So the insurance market has gotten very, very tight. We're talking about property insurance here. So a lot of carriers took just huge amounts of losses in 2021. In Texas, we had the big freeze, and it was unusual in the sense that it got the entire state of Texas. And we have a lot of people and a lot of property here. You know, we have about 30 million people living here. And so every corner of Texas had a lot of claims from that freeze, and that's quite unusual. Typically a storm or something will hit part of a state or the area, but it won't hit the whole thing. So 2021 was different for that reason. And right on top of the freeze here in Austin, we had a hailstorm that was pretty localized, but was pretty severe for what it did hit. So if you own property in the city of Austin, you probably had a hail loss right on top of your freeze losses.
Right.
So the data takes a little while to sort of spread out across the industry and get crunched and everything. So here in early 2023, we're still feeling the fallout from 21. So carriers are getting a lot more skittish about what they will cover. And again, specifically in Texas, some carriers have left the market altogether and just said, no, we don't want any more, we're done. Others have gotten much stricter on underwriting, which is just evaluating the risk to see if it's a good fit for us and if it's something that we can offer to insure at any rate, let alone a competitive rate. So there's a lot of that going on. Some of the trends on property insurance are stricter underwriting. So if there has been claims in the past, you want to make sure, let's say you had a property, it had some hail damage. It turns out that it wasn't enough to replace the roof. So maybe you got a little bit of money for your claim, or maybe you didn't get any because it didn't meet your deductible. You still want to go ahead, make the repairs, and document that you made the repairs. So the recommendation there is use a business who can give you a documented receipt saying, okay, we fixed the broken pipes or patched the roof or whatever the repair was. Be careful about just using some guys to do the repairs, because if you go to sell your property or you go to just shop insurance, that claim will show up and the carrier is going to want to know, did you make those repairs, and send us the proof. It has just gotten that sticky now with the crazy amounts of losses. So that's recommendation number one, is probably a good idea to get estimates before you file a claim. Know what your deductible is. And that goes right back to what you were saying about, should I pay for this or not? And one of the things as an investor you can do is you can carry higher deductibles on your investment properties. Typically, as long as you don't have a loan, you can carry whatever limits you see fit. But just know that that means you're going to pay that first amount toward your damage, whatever that might wind up being. So it looks attractive up front to say, well, I'll save some premium on the front end. But if your deductible is 3% or something of your building value, probably means you're going to replace your own roof. It's about how that adds up.
Yeah.
So again, if you're an investor, you have some cash reserves, you can roll like that, and that is getting to be more of a trend. If you are a smaller investor and maybe you have bought a new house and then you're keeping your old one as a rental, but that's your first investment property, go ahead and pay a little more for the insurance and don't carry such high deductibles. And again, unless you've got $15,000 or $20,000 in cash reserves to pay it when it comes up and you have a high deductible.
So be conservative is what you're saying.
Be conservative, especially if you're a newer, smaller scale investor.
What if you have a home that it could be a standalone structure or it could have a shared wall, but it's classified as a condo and your HOA takes care of the roof, which is such a frequent claim.
Right.
So if I don't have to take care of the roof and I'm an investor, maybe new to moderate investor, couldn't I still do like a 2 or 3% deductible, thinking that I probably at least wouldn't have to replace the roof? So what kind of other big catastrophic normalities do you see? What are the other things?
Sure. So for a condo unit, the owner is insuring the interior of the unit, and sometimes you'll hear it called studs out is the HOA policy. And those are also getting tighter and crazier and more expensive and higher deductibles. And so that's the HOA really has to sort of take a good look at those. As the unit owner, you have a walls in or studs in policy. So you won't have to take care of the roof because that'll be up to the association. What happens in units, the biggest thing I see is water leaking and causing a big mess. So it's typical for a dishwasher or an ice maker for that water supply line to let go and flood the unit. And it never happens when somebody's home. So by the time the water's gotten all over the place and made a big mess, it's caused some damage. So as the unit owner, that's the kind of thing you need to be insured for. The second biggest thing is fires. And fortunately, those aren't that common. But again, if your interior unit burns, you are, as the owner, are on the hook to replace all the contents and also replace everything right up to the sheetrock. So you might find yourself having to replace your entire kitchen, for example, and take out all the cabinets and replace them. So that could start getting expensive.
Right.
So to your question about, as the investor, could you carry a higher deductible on that? And the answer is sure. It just depends. And that's something I always do, is try to figure out who my client is. What is their level of risk tolerance?
Yeah.
I will often say, well, what will keep you up at night versus what will help you sleep.
Yes, that's a
And,
good
and then
one.
that's where we figure out the sweet spot and go from
Yes.
there.
So what if I have 5, 6, 7 properties? Does farmers offer something where they start looking at any kind of a discount or any other recommendations?
Um, somewhat. The company we use for rental properties is Foremost, which is one of the farmers' companies.
Mm.
And they will do a multi-policy discount up to 8 properties.
Mm.
So there is a little bit of that available. So that's pretty well how that works. There was a time where I might look at putting those properties on a commercial insurance policy, but that for 1 and 2 family houses, that's not as feasible anymore.
Okay.
So each property is probably going to have its own policy. And there are some discounts available if you carry multiple properties with us. Also, if you use a property management company, there's a discount for that as well.
Why?
I think it's because the idea is that the property is more closely monitored. Sometimes an owner might not even live in the same state, so they don't see their properties very often. A management company is going to go by there and check on it. They're going to handle tenant turnover and things like that. And so when there is a tenant turnover, they'll go in and see if anything needs to be done to the interior and make any updates and repairs. So the idea for having a management discount is just that the property's being more carefully monitored.
Okay.
Than it might be from an owner who lives in Germany or somewhere.
Yes, we've dealt with that. Tell me a little bit about, we've talked about this lots of times, umbrella policies.
Sure.
Scary.
Right. So
Sounds so
umbrella
big.
policies are, the term's a little bit misleading, but umbrella policy is extra liability protection. And the liability side of insurance is something a lot of people don't think about much because fortunately it doesn't come up very often. But as a property owner, you do have a lot of liability exposure. That's what we call it. And if somebody were to just fall down on your property and claim you were negligent, maybe you left a garden hose out or a little crack in the sidewalk, or even if you aren't negligent, it might cost you a lot of money to just defend yourself and make it go away. So an umbrella policy is that extra protection for if a claim gets really out of hand and you lose a big settlement like you see on TV or something.
Right.
And it's very rare. Those are, the attorneys call those rainmaker lawsuits, and they don't happen that often. But umbrella insurance is a good, inexpensive way to just give yourself that extra amount of coverage. Typically, a home policy might have a $500,000 liability limit. So in order for the umbrella policy to apply, that we have to first exhaust that $500,000. And in my 17 years, I have to say I've never seen a liability claim go over the limit.
Nice.
However, that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. So if you're somebody with a lot of assets, umbrella is for you. Even if you don't have a lot of assets, what the umbrella policy will do is give your carrier the power to come to the table, make an offer, and say, look, if we give you this amount, will you just go away? And everybody, the next day, you're back in business and you move on with things, versus maybe a lawsuit that could hang over you for years.
So I have a question about that. You talk about like the garden hose or an uneven piece of concrete on the sidewalk. What about like some kind of a defect with the property operating systems? Let's say the hot water heater was malfunctioning and it was putting out carbon monoxide and it resulted in a very serious injury, if not a death.
Right.
As a landlord, could I be sued for that? And would an umbrella policy protect me?
So the answer on that is it depends. I had a case with a water heater, and unfortunately it wasn't carbon monoxide, but it was the heater broke. And of course, it was on the third floor of a condo, so the water got all over the 2 units right below it.
Oh, wow.
And to answer your question, it depends.
Mhm.
If the landlord knew the heater was defective, if they'd gotten a complaint, if they'd been cited for it, if it can be shown that you as the landlord were aware of the situation and you didn't fix it, that's where the liability comes in, because you have to show that there is some kind of negligence.
Right.
And negligence can be accidental. It doesn't mean, but in the case of the water heater that I had, farmers decided that the heater wasn't that old. So there was no reason for the landlord to think, oh, well, it's going to be a problem.
Mhm.
It basically just broke. And since we decided that that was more of a product defect,
Mhm.
the owner of the unit where the water heater was not negligent,
Mhm.
because they said, well, it's 4 years old, it shouldn't have any trouble, but it did.
Mm.
So we sort of said there's no liability on the part of the landlord in that case.
Understood.
So
Makes
so
sense.
there has to be a little bit of, some assumption that the person was aware that the thing might have been leaking gas.
Right.
Maybe a plumber might have pointed it out or something.
Or an inspection report.
Inspection report.
Yeah.
So then if the person didn't take care of it, then there's negligence, and then here we go on a big claim.
Okay.
And typically, again, I've never had a big one like that. Typically, though, the insurance carrier has to defend you as a client.
Mhm.
So to answer your question, the long answer to your question is yes, in all likelihood.
Okay.
So the umbrella policy again would come in if the settlement, or if you had agreed to settle and your insurance carrier agreed to settle and you didn't have enough on your base policy, that's where the umbrella comes in.
Yeah,
So-
people worry all the time. They've got a couple of rental properties and then their own homestead.
Right.
And they think about, the one clumsy tenant that's gonna like trip and fall down the stairs, and that could compromise all of their properties and all of their
Sure,
years of
sure.
hard work.
Right.
Okay.
In Texas, you can go after anybody's assets except for their personal residence.
Mhm.
And even that, you can't get kicked out of your own house. But if you lose a big enough judgment, you can have a lien put on it.
Mhm.
So you don't ever get to enjoy your equity if you ever go to sell it.
Scary
So
position.
They,
Yeah.
they can't put you on the street, but they can come pretty close.
And umbrella policies are shockingly affordable.
Yeah, because they're relatively rare.
Yeah.
For a household, if you have 2 drivers that don't have a lot of tickets and a home and maybe one rental property, an umbrella policy might be $400 or $500 a year for an extra $1 million of protection.
Right.
So it's always a nice thing to put together into an insurance package for a client. And for us, one thing umbrella does is it helps keep clients in-house. It's once you get home, auto, rental property, umbrella together, it's a little harder to sort of pull one of those out of there because it kind of affects everything else that's going on.
Right. Sure.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And
So
one more thing about umbrella,
Yeah.
your biggest exposure for any of us is not your house, it's what you drive.
Mhm.
It's far more likely to seriously injure somebody just by hitting them with your car
Yeah.
than it is for them to have an accident on your property.
Sad but true.
So if you drive a vehicle, you should consider umbrella.
So everybody.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about three more things that are crossing my mind with you. One, just to recap, that you've been my insurance provider for a long time.
Mhm.
And on several occasions, one of which, that was probably the most devastating for us is when our house was broken into and we were robbed.
Right.
And if we had had, it still makes me emotional just thinking about it. If we had had just like a regular, no face brand insurance company, I can't even imagine how that day would have gone for us. But I was able to call you and I told you what had happened and you calmed me down. Your company took care of us within, it felt like it was a while ago, but my memory is like, it seemed like just days later.
Right.
We got a check for all of our losses. And I mean, that doesn't make you whole in the sense that you feel, violated and victimized,
Right.
but
Right.
it replaced our items that were stolen, and it
Sure.
was considerable. So anyone that would want to go with like XYZ company from .com, wherever, it's just not the same. You can't compare that kind of an experience to not having your own insurance agent looking out for you.
Well, thank you. I do remember that day because losses of that size aren't that common either, for somebody to be able to steal that much stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
While we were home.
while you were home, right?
Yeah.
So I remember I said, "Look, your stuff is gone, but you're okay."
Yeah.
And so let's start there, and we can replace the stuff.
It was crazy.
And to your guys' credit, your husband is a bike fanatic and an engineer, and he's good with the details. And he had everything very carefully logged about what he had.
Yeah.
And so here's some more free advice. Have a good idea of what it is you have, especially the expensive stuff.
Yeah.
And if something's custom, if it's custom bike parts or custom anything,
Yeah.
at the minimum, have a picture of it or something, but better is receipts or, an estimate that you can pull from somewhere. Because in a theft loss or a fire loss, the adjuster has to have something to work on.
For sure.
And I'm glad, thank you for that shout out again. I do represent a great company. We've always been really good with claims, and we do handle them promptly. So I've always been happy to represent the Farmers brand. I've never felt like I've had to kind of look over my shoulder and go, are they going to back me up here or not? Because
Right.
they always have. And that was a kind of a proud moment for Farmers, because it's, I like to think that's how we handle all our claims. And typically we're pretty quick with it. One thing that's kind of fun about Farmers, and you get when you go to conferences and stuff, we have, I think, 3 or 4 mobile catastrophe motorhomes, basically. And they're kind of like storm chasers. They can move around to different parts of the country and set up quickly and just be that extra layer of phone lines and computer lines. And
Wow.
if there's a video somewhere about in 2011 when we had the fires out in Bastrop, the mobile command center got right over there, and we were just sort of at a highway intersection where there was just some extra space at the corner. So we were right on the corner where everybody could see us. And we're there processing claims and showing up with hot dogs and stuff. A lot of us volunteered and got out there. And it was a lot of the people said, wow, this is just really neat to see that you're out here, and you care. And a couple of people pulled up and said, well, we're with, a different company. Where are they? And of course we got all that on the video.
Yeah.
But it is how we roll. So it does make you feel good to represent a good brand and know that we don't have the cheapest rates out there. And I don't think we ever have. You can find something cheaper, and it will be cheaper, is how I would put it. But we do certainly back it up. So.
That's awesome. I agree and endorse. So let's also toggle over to the other two things that I'm thinking about, which is we've talked about you do restaurants and you do multifamily.
Yes.
Tell me just a little bit about those.
Sure. So my background prior to becoming an insurance agent was 20 years in corporate restaurant management. So I speak restaurant because it's kind of its own language, just like real estate or insurance are their own
Yeah.
language. Restaurant is definitely its own kind of dialect.
That's funny.
So we do have a great restaurant insurance policy that can tailor from, a little coffee shop or even a food trailer, and it can go all the way up to a large scale fine dining restaurant. And it's the same policy, but there's a lot of ways we can tailor it. So if you're a high-end restaurant and you've got a wine vault, for example,
right.
If you can show us your inventory, we will insure those bottles of wine for their retail value.
Wow.
So if you have a big fire and you lose your wine vault, that's something that will cover, for example. So there's a lot of different things to put in depending on the scale of the restaurant. There can be alcohol liability, liquor liability. There can be workers' comp for your people. In a restaurant, it's not about if somebody is going to get injured, it's when. It's a high injury occupation because you're dealing with a lot of hot things and a lot of sharp knives and wet floors and everybody's running. So it's a matter of, sooner or later, somebody's going to the minor emergency clinic if you run a restaurant. So we can put all that together, and there's a nice cross discount if you do business policy and workers' comp with us. And workers' comp is worth throwing out there because it's something that a lot of small businesses kind of tend to ignore because they think it's too complicated and too expensive. And it is a little complicated, but that's why I do my job. It's like you send me your payroll and your head count and we can set you up. That's really all it takes for the business owner. And workers' comp is one of the few things that's actually gone down in rates over the last 8 to 10 years.
Oh.
Somewhere, either people started being safer on the job or rates started getting calculated differently. But it's actually quite the bargain for, again, protecting both the worker and the employer. If Texas doesn't make you carry workers' comp as a small business, it's the only state where it isn't mandated. In some states, the state runs it, and some states just mandate private insurance, but it's required in all the other 49 states. So
I remember when
anyway, quick plug for workers' comp.
Yeah. So tell me the difference. I remember when Texas Honey Ham in Westlake burnt, and I had heard, and this is hearsay, of course, but I had heard that their insurance compensated them for their employee salaries, I think. So they were closed for some time, but they were also able to pay all of their employees that whole time. Is that workman's comp?
I think that probably came out of what we call their BOP, their business owner policy. That was probably under the loss of income coverage. And so they probably did pay it.
It's remarkable.
So the idea is that if you suffer a loss and it's something that's covered, which a fire certainly would be, we're going to try to get you back in business, and that may include paying your staff for a while. So yeah.
So tell us a little bit about multifamily.
Sure.
How complicated is that?
Well, something I specialize in is insurance for condo associations. So those are multifamily, obviously. The most common style are the apartment style condos, where the building looks like, a 3-story apartment building or whatever it might be. And then there are also townhouse style condos. So that's the second most common. And those are a little bit elaborate, but they're elaborate on our side. So they're very simple for the client. It's not unusual at all for an HOA to need to carry up to 5 policies to cover everything they need covered.
Wow.
And the insurance requirements are typically in the HOA's documents, and they're, I've always called it the covenant, but whatever, another phrase for it is their CCRs. But it's the governing document for the association, and the insurance requirements are typically laid out pretty specifically. So what Farmers has always been able to do is take all that big mess with 5 policies, 5 deck pages, 5 things to pay, 5 things to call in a claim. There's a big ouch right there. And we put it all in one policy. So from the perspective of managing the insurance, it's much simpler. My target audiences are usually whoever has to be in charge of the insurance, and that's either a property manager or it might be somebody on the HOA board. And right off the bat, we can make their lives a lot simpler by just combining everything into one policy.
Okay.
So that's a big selling point. I've always thought, it's like, how would you like all this to go from 5 things to 1 thing?
Yeah.
And then maybe talk to somebody who's been doing it for a while on top of it. So that's the value proposition right there. So underwriting on those properties has gotten very tight these days. So again, the property should be well maintained. If you go and walk the property and it just doesn't look like somewhere you'd want to have your mom live in, or your kid, or you know, would you live there? Probably time to have a chat with whoever's running the place and say, I can tell you, we're going to come and inspect this place after we insure your property. So I really recommend you do these things now versus us making you do it 6 months from now. So again, that's a part of the trend of things getting much tighter and insurance carriers just only wanting to write what we consider to be good risks.
Right.
And a good risk is one that is well maintained.
Yes. And so if I own one of those apartments in the whole apartment building, your insurance policy going to the property management company is basically going to cover all of the things that they're promising to cover, which we talked about earlier, like the walls out and the roof, those kinds of things. I see. What if it's a large apartment building and the whole apartment building is owned by like a partnership or one person?
Right, one owner, right. So then we would insure the whole building. And that would be considered an apartment versus condos. And then we insure the whole thing. So,
would you say that that's part of what you do also and specialize in, or?
I have a few rental apartment buildings, not as many, but I do have some.
Okay.
Some of my management companies manage both types of property. So and it's certainly something I can do.
Okay.
Again, it helps if it's been fixed up or if it's been kept in good condition.
And you do insurance anywhere in Texas?
Yes.
So
I tend to specialize in the Austin area just because one of the expectations is we can provide photos of a property. We can say, oh, I've been by there, I've looked at it, and it looks like a good risk to me. So that's not to say I can't pull stuff from online, but an older property, say in Houston, would be tough for me because it would be hard to get over there and get photos. But technically, yes, I can insure anywhere in Texas.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that we will wrap up by letting everyone know that your contact information will be in the details.
Okay.
With the link, so that if anyone wanted to reach out and find out, maybe they want to get new bids for 2023 on packaging up all their properties into one spot, maybe getting an umbrella policy, and any property managers out there that need to Make their life simple, right?
Right, right,
Who would say no? Let's take 5 tasks and put them into one.
right, right.
I love it.
Thank you, Kat. It's good to chat.
Thank you, Eric. I think you are a wealth of knowledge, a definite self-proclaimed insurance nerd. I love
All
that.
right.
Well, thanks for your time today, and we'll see
Sure.
you soon.
Okay, thanks.
All right, take it easy.